So welcome all of you, and we really appreciate you making the time to come and share your experiences and insights into participating in what is certainly one of the most prestigious and well-established international art events in the world. So congratulations to all of you for being chosen and representing South Africa. It's good for South Africa not to be represented by corrupt criminals in the usual way, but by artists, not giant flagpoles. And just to note that the Venice Biennale is not just the most prestigious, one of the most prestigious international art events. It was also the first Biennale, and established in 1895, and really set the pattern for arts biennales, which of course have proliferated to the point that they happen just about all around the world. But Venice has very much kept its place as one of the most prestigious of the biennales. It is of course called a biennale because it happens every second year, the arts, theater and performance and music, and it alternates with a biennale which focuses on architecture. And since 1907, the biennale has become, interestingly, a nationalized event, beginning with Belgium building its own pavilion, and reaching the point now that in the 21st century, just about every country on earth, every country that's in the United Nations is also featured in some way and has some representation at the Venice Biennale. And it's interesting to note that African art first appeared at the 1922 Biennale, of course, the very same year that WITS was established at a university. This is our centenary. And it wasn't a national exhibition. It was still very much within the theme of modernist embrace of African art as stimulating primitivism, but African art was featured in 1922. And really the most significant development, I think, in terms of African engagement, of course, was when the late Nigerian-born curator, Okiwe Enwezo, was appointed as the first African curator of the overall Biennale in 2015, and was an extremely influential curator, and in many ways established the pattern that has been followed by subsequent curators right up to the present day, when the 2022 Biennale was curated by an Italian, a woman, Cecilia Almenani, under the theme of the milk of dreams, referring, of course, to the English woman surrealist artist Leonora Carrington. It's her book on dreams, Mexico, and surrealism. So I'm now going to hand over to Amé, who, as the curator of the South African Pavilion, I think is well situated to speak to our three participating artists about what they learned, what lessons. And Amé's own PhD research is into art market and independent artists, their relationship to that market. And I think it's also significant that the Biennale was expressly established back in 1895 in order to find ways to sell and market contemporary art, a very unusual notion back in 1895. So Amé, over to you and the artists.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having us, and welcome to Roger and Lebohang and Phumulani. Nice to see you guys only now online. I suppose it's not nice to only see you online, but nice to see you regardless. I'm just going to share my screen real quick for a short presentation on the pavilion. Does it do that? Okay, just so that we can all get on the same page. So Professor Christou, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. So our theme for the South African Pavilion was conceptualized around Into the Light, which is a sub-theme for the overall theme of the Biennale, which obviously, as you said, is the milk of dreams. We use the pandemic as a springboard, for the starting point for the theme of our exhibition, which reflected on the effects of solitudes and separation during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how it can be a vehicle for artists to embark on a process of self-evaluation and reflection on heightened creativity. So for us, the Into the Light concept actually reflects on many additional layers of reflection, actually bringing the diversity of artists that we've presented at the pavilion into the light on the global stage. But as you mentioned, also, the independence from large institutions and galleries that one would find in South Africa, as well as really creating a dialogue around the transformation of the use of photography and photographic media in combination with traditional art practices. So the exhibition design was really focused around creating a maze-like structure where each artist would have their own room. As you enter the pavilion, you'd be confronted firstly with Phumulani's room and his beautiful mixed media works on canvas that incorporated open source kind of photocopy material, creating the figure of Godide that you see in the first painting. Also with a combination of augmented reality and stop motion animation. This kind of first level of the exhibition really deals with the geographical exploration. While if you move deeper into the pavilion, you go into more deeper and personal spaces of the works of Lebo and Roger. But Phumulani kind of situates us in this fantasy world of exploration where there's an intrepid explorer that kind of deals with themes around play, sense of belonging, the relationships between fantasy and reality, and just cultural association, various states of being that he speaks to. This is a little bit more closer look at his work that he presented at the pavilion. His video room, and then the little iPads on the wall had that element of augmented reality, which I'm not sure if he might want to speak to just now. And then the next room, here's one of the augmented reality elements that people were engaging with, which was super fun as well. It's quite an interesting connection between physical works or works that traditionally exist in this traditional media and how Phumulani's incorporated this augmented reality element, kind of blurring the lines of how we've been engaging in the world around us, halfway in the digital and halfway in the real world. And then the next room was Lebohang's beautiful Black to Fairy Tales body of work. As you entered, her room had two entrances, and as you entered into a room, you would see this beautiful figure of Snow Black, which she had created. So it's an autobiographical body of work where she has positioned herself as the protagonist in these westernized fairy tales of her childhood, creating this character of Snow Black. And then they are set in these one-act cameos of a township in South Africa, kind of contrasting with the milieu of the fairy tale mythical folklore, and contrasting that with the kind of grim reality in which she produced this work, which was in the African township. This is a little bit more on her work, and throughout the pavilion, the nuances of the space really contributed so beautifully to the aesthetic of the overall exhibition that we wanted to do. It was quite dark and nightmarish at times, I suppose, but kind of very positive as well. There are these beautiful dualisms that we played with in the exhibition. And then the third room was Roger Ballen's Apparitions, which is a psychological exploration of the images in our mind, kind of reflecting on where our dreams come from and our aspirations come from. And these works were initially inspired by etchings or drawings that Roger found in an abandoned women's prison that had burnt down and the windows were blackened out, and there were drawings on the windows, and he kind of emulated that technique, painting on glass to create these figures, photographing them with film cameras, and then reimagining them and reproducing them as light boxes for the exhibition. So the space, his space, of course, also was so beautiful with those arched windows, the wooden floor, and really created that performative element I'm not sure how they feel about seeing these images shortly after the pavilion. Makes me a little bit nostalgic. But yeah, that is really the imagery that I just wanted to share about the pavilion, so I can stop sharing. And then I just wanted to, I suppose we can start off with how the artists felt about representing South Africa in Venice, and we can go in order if you'd like. Phumulani, first you, and then Lebohang, and then Roger.
Good day, everybody. Thanks a lot for this opportunity to present the work post when the Venice Biennale is still going on, but post us coming from there. And thank you, Amé, for the presentation or the pre-presentation. So I think, of course, it is quite, one of the important exhibitions to participate with the Venice Biennale. In relations to, of course, its history, in relations to how the positioning of the Biennale is situated within the continent itself, not, of course, within the borders of South Africa. But of course, it also lends to the ideas of, kind of specific nuances that, specific artists kind of deal with in their work as a form of, like resonating with some, cultural or political or social spectrum that is kind of embedded within our context. Although somehow it's also kind of in part, yes, it's limiting in a way that, like, for myself, I've kind of positioned myself not necessarily, of course, as a South African artist because I'm born here, but the fact that the borders are quite wider than how they seem, it somehow is an entry point. So I've kind of been interested in these kind of melange of ideas that are not necessarily nested, but the global positioning of artists, I think, is something that kind of resonates with, the global ecosystem that's currently happening. Also within, the pandemic, the fact that, we have been somehow affected by, by COVID-19 as a form of like reflection. Of course, yes, then is a starting point for us to think through those ideas of borders and, spaces of imagining that are not necessarily like context-based, but somehow are shared. So these are some of the ideas that I'm somehow interested in. And in parts, they do fluctuate in relations to forms of documentary and fiction, because I've been necessarily interested in how the collision between documentary regime of doing things and more fictional based style of either filmmaking or video making resonates with these like global conversations. So it's briefly about the work for the Venice Biennale. So it's a series of, well, it's a body of work that I've been developing for at least 2 years now, exploring my fictional character Kotite. So it's based on Patra's Kotite. Well, my clan name is Kotite, so I found an image of Kotite. So he was the son of Ngugunyani in Gaza, which is currently called Mozambique. So after the Portuguese troops invaded Mozambique, they were sent to exile. So this is kind of has been a starting point or research to look into this character and really thinking about the positioning within history and the positioning within contemporary forms of representation, and also my personal experiences. Also, there's a work titled Cloud Migration, which started last year after I was invited by Dineke van der Walt to intervene on a series of prints. So the prints were part of the Fortrekker monument. So she invited a group of artists to intervene on these illustrations. So in relation to how, of course, the ethnographic rendition or the rendering of the images somehow kind of paused or, erased the Black body within the context of South Africa in particular. So the landscapes are quite like very utopic, like the landscapes are, like kind of have a representation of the savannah, which is like not really occupied, So I kind of contrasted those with a series of images I acquired from Alfred Dogen-Cronin. So most of the photographers would probably know of Alfred Dogen-Cronin, who was documenting Southern African tribes. So like a stop motion is just positioning back the black body to its original place. But of course, then it resonates with, in terms of thinking about the timeline and how things somehow collapse, or how images like collapse, or how images kind of leak in relation to how we read them digitally, and then how images also are kind of a frame that allows one to like pause and kind of reflect. Yeah, so this is kind of a brief reflection around.
Thanks,
I hope that
thank you. Lebo, what thoughts on your experience at the Venice Biennale?
Hello, everyone, and hi, Amé. So I hadn't been to the Venice Biennale before, so my expectations were quite high, which I must admit were met. And I mean, I think beyond the South African pavilion, the other national pavilions were really amazing. The exhibition by Cecilia that where the artists responded to the theme, or were invited to respond to the theme, Milk of Dreams, was exceptional. And I think that for me, a lot of the works that I got to see at the Biennale were raised many different questions around sort of production making, around and I think also around sort of individuality, because there were so many different works and different interpretations around this idea of fantasy. And I mean, also with the artists in our pavilion responding to the theme of Milk of Dreams and fantasy, to be able to see how so many artists from all of these different contexts are responding to this one theme, or whose works are speaking alongside this theme was extremely amazing. So I'm not sure what else to add besides speaking, or about my work, which I think we'll get to that question later, maybe. And I think you've already sort of touched on the different works.
I think if you briefly want to say now something about your work, anything that you'd like to add, I think that would be good, as we'll go on to more kind of reflections on the Biennale just now.
So the body of work that I'm showing at the pavilion is titled Black to Fairy Tales, with the L in brackets, and speaking to this idea of going back, but also going back to these Western fairy tales, understanding that as a child, these Western fairy tales that became part of my upbringing, or the literature that I consumed and identified with as a child, were only had white characters. And so these and also my memories of having to audition for all the school plays in my primary school as a child, and prepare for being a Cinderella or Snow White or Goldilocks, and never ever getting the parts. And so it becomes a moment. So the work was speaking to this idea of looking back to those memories, and also recognizing that I also was only exposed to African literature as an adult. And so that contrast between the original stories that Disney's version of Western fairy tales was based on, and the original stories by the Grimm brothers, and sort of contrasting the two, and contrasting as well literature that I then became exposed to as an adult from the continent. So the work has those sort of three layers. It looks at my memories of auditioning for these Western versions of the fairy tales, and the German Grimm brothers' original versions of these fairy tales, and then contrasting that with African narratives or African literature, which also, I think, as a child growing up in Katlehong, which is where which is where I then went back to my grandmother's house to restage these photographs and use a lot of items and a lot of childhood toys or elements that I loved as a child to stage these memories of Western fairy tales.
Thanks, Lebo. And Roger, what were the major learning curves or what experience for you at the Venice Biennale, and also just a little bit in short, your reflections on your work at the Biennale?
Look, being in such a large international exhibition is always interesting. I mean, it's like going to a big art fair. I think you just have to accept the fact that certain things will jump into your mind and other things will fall by the wayside. So it's like going into a big hypermarket in some ways. I mean, all the products are beautifully packed and there for you to buy. And then it's your job to go around and decide what's relevant to your own state of mind in some way or another. I mean, I think that's always been my approach when I go to events like this. There's some things jump out and some things don't, and that's, after all these years, that's just what I have to accept. So there were, I guess, a number of exhibitions that I'll remember for a long time, and others just pass by the wayside. And I think, when you go to such a large event, you're bound to find these things, which is great. I mean, if you walk away sometimes with just a few memories, well, you shouldn't regret that. That's really great. I mean, I often say, just on another path, sometimes on a whole trip, I can't remember one smell, not even one. It just shows how the sense of smell has been negated in modern societies and because of the pollution and everything else. So sometimes my best memory in a whole exhibition is that I walked past a park and smelled a leaf. And well, that's fine. Well, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think a show like this offers the viewer and the participants an opportunity to find these things, find these diamonds, find these special memories. And that's the way I look at it. From my own point of view, look, the works that were taken over about 7-8 years. It ended up being a Thames and Hudson book called The Theater of Apparitions. All the light boxes started with a photograph of a window. All the pictures were taken on a particular windows in a warehouse in Johannesburg. I used various techniques which I developed over a period of 7, 8, 9 years, using materials such as paints, epoxies, glues, and other things to create these images. So it was an ongoing process. And I guess what was the defining issue here? Well, the defining issue is to make the invisible visible. So I guess if we think about it existentially, what's going to happen to us? So what's going to happen to us? What form are we going to end up in? And who's going to be around us, if anybody? So, well, there's many approaches to this. You can make people for over 1,000 years made paintings of what it would be like in the heaven or hell. And this has progressed into different formats and different ideas and different motifs. So for me, I was trying to find a path into the other world. So that's what I was looking at. Because apparitions are ghosts, and ghosts are spirits. And I think every culture in the world, every person in the world somehow or another recognizes this archetypal aspect of their own state of mind, and where it might have come from, or where they can't find it, but it's always there. Where do we go? Where do we end up? So that was the motivation to try to define visually on these windows. And so it was a long period of trial and error, and ultimately each window that I felt was relevant was photographed, and then these images were scanned and printed up and sold as photographs. But in this case, we felt it might be relevant and might have a certain I guess, not overwhelming, but a strong aesthetic by putting them into light boxes. So fortunately, we found an organization in Johannesburg who was very professional, very organized, and they were able to make light boxes from the films that we made of the original scan. So I was extremely pleased with the results. When people went into this place, they felt almost like they were in a sanctuary or a church. It was dark, it felt ancient. It felt like there was something invisible being made visible, or spirits in the air. I think I left the biennial feeling very positive about the results and very positive about the way the other artists of the team here were also presented. So, and Amé, I want to thank you for the great job, and also Phumulani and Lebo for producing such also strong, powerful work. And as a team, I think we should have won the grand prize, if you want my opinion.
Thanks, Roger. Thank you as well for your beautiful work. And I'm sure I speak for everyone. Yeah, we did a great job, I just want to say, all of us. So just, the pandemic, even though we kind of moving a little bit beyond, hopefully or not, I'm not sure, it played such a major role in the delay of the Biennale, which was supposed to happen last year. And it was postponed to this year, and it was such a central theme for many national pavilions, for many artists. The conversation came up, and I wanted to ask you guys how you experienced the dynamic of the international art scene in such a public arena, and the engagement at the Biennale. Was there anything noticeably different, or did you find that people kind of working towards the same trajectory that there was prior to the pandemic, or what was your experience of those dynamics? In any order which you want to answer.
I mean, I don't know if I felt that and I don't also know how. I don't know if I felt like artists were responding to the theme of like the pandemic. And I also don't know, I don't know also how you sort of respond to the theme of the pandemic, really. I think for me, it definitely shifted how I work and how I thought around the sort of structures that one puts in place as an artist, and especially as a full-time artist, but also as an independent artist, and what that looks like. But also, I think with us participating in the pavilion, in the Venice Biennale, as artists that have a very much independent practice, and what that really means, I think, and what sort of support you need as an artist as you participate on those sorts of platforms. I think that for me, it really, more than thinking around how other artists were responding to the overall theme of Milk and Dreams and to the pandemic, I think I just kept on thinking around what has shifted for each and every person, due to the pandemic, what has shifted in terms of how they think about what art means to them. Does it still mean the same thing? Are you still on the same sort of journey that you were on before? Are the same themes that you were interested in still relevant to you right now? And also, do you require more sort of support? Are you having a healthier or different practice? So I think for me that those are some of the themes that in preparation for my participation kept on coming up, because I mean the reality also is that it requires a lot to participate. It requires a lot of administrative support, administrative structures to be put in place. And there's just a lot involved. And I think that, that for me becomes also the takeaway from this. It's, do artists have the sort of necessary structures to sort of become full-time independent artists, and what are the sort of important structures to put in place, I think, as you grow as an artist and as you have the opportunities to participate at such grand platforms that come with so much work.
Professor Christo has a question, was raising his hand for.
Yeah, it's not my question, but I did want to alert you to, I thought, a very interesting question from Pebo in the chat, and it's specifically directed to Phumulani. And I thought maybe he can respond to that question in talking about his engagement with the larger Biennale and the art world as represented there. Phumulani, can you see the question from Pebo?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I mean, okay, it says, I'm curious about the idea of National Art Fair and in relation to your work, particularly in response to implied border making. Did it feel like your work spoke to this idea of the international art fair? Yeah, I think somehow, like having had done, quite some activities as well, like international, like residencies and also studying abroad and, participated in a few like performance projects and so forth. I think in one, somehow the response to kind of the national is somehow a tricky one, I'm sorry, I'm not quite like a patriotic person, So I mean, I'm from South Africa. I am from South Africa in particularly, but like, yeah, I think somehow what was somehow maybe keen as a response to the question was like, having had to travel or study abroad was more thinking of myself outside, as a starting point, because then allows one a position to kind of reflect, and understand like the nuances and, the kind of groundwork that one has to deal with first and foremost, before being an artist. From my personal experiences, I think it's just an important like reflection to have, because in the position of South Africa as a geography is somehow interesting in different directions of, yes, necessarily think about, the politics of the country, but in relation to how the position of the country is. Like South Africa is quite far, like from the rest of, the world, and our kind of isolation has somehow created a kind of an enclave, like a cocoon somehow, that we somehow, it's more like a shell that we kind of difficult to like break in. And of course, this is a response to the apartheid system and how it kind of created those like limitations. And these are somehow the limitations or parameters that we kind of still performing day to day or whatever. The borders in the South African region, going to other countries like Mozambique or Zimbabwe. So of course, then it's for me necessarily, it's not necessarily about South Africa, but it's what kind of interlocutors that South Africa like speaks through within the Southern African region, including Botswana and the rest. So for me, that first and foremost is a more like personal, it's like a starting point. And then in response to how then the work is like read or reflected on in relation to the South African Pavilion or participating in an international art fair, I think it's an important, maybe step for one's career. At the same time, it's, it kind of resonates to those ideas of kind of participating on the global stage rather than, on a local one, and of course, then in this way brings like some of the themes or nuances that I personally deal with, which I feel like they're part of the global conversation, not necessarily the South African one. So for me, that's an important, it's an important thing to think about and something that I constantly think about from day to day. Also, like I think that sense of like South Africa being quite far from the rest of the world is, somehow, it's it's interesting in one level, but at the same time, it's quite frustrating, you know. Yeah, but this is what, you know, wanting to be involved in a global stage kind of necessarily mean. You have to like really kick those doors if you have to.
Thanks, Phumulani. Thank you so much for that thoughtful response. Roger, how did you experience the dynamics of the Biennale, and how has it changed for you? You also travel a lot. You go to a lot of international events. How did you experience that?
Well, as I was mentioning, you know, there's good and bad all the time. The good side is that you find things for yourself and you explore the exhibitions and you find these memorable moments, and that's what's good and leaves you with something. And sometimes you find stuff that you don't understand, you don't comprehend, you can't understand the meaning, the purpose of why it should be in an event like this. So, you know, this is plus and minuses, walking from hall to hall, from picture to picture, that I get wherever I go in the world. You know, it's the same thing. You can go to Basel, you can go to the Frieze, you can go to this place and that place, this museum, that museum, and you have the same experience all the time, you know. And you shouldn't say to yourself, oh, there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with this, or something wrong with that. Well, you should get beyond that and just try to find the things that, as I said, have some personal meaning for you. And if you're challenged enough and you don't understand something, well, maybe it's up to you to figure it out, and you may have that motivation. And if you don't, it doesn't matter. That's where I am at age 72. You know, I just, if it hits me, it hits me. And if it doesn't hit me, it doesn't hit me. So what? That's the life. That's life. Every day that happens wherever I go. I could be driving out of my driveway and something powerful happens in front of me, and that's no different than walking around the Venice Biennale. It just leaves you with something. And I think that's what, as an artist, that's what I'm doing all the time. And, you know, I have to just relate to my own state of being, and not try to get involved with politics, sociology, money, and all the other things that shape the art world. Unfortunately, that's, you know, we're not, I think Phumulani was saying this in some way or another, that, you know, this art world is full of politics. It's being influenced by media. It's been influenced by big money. It's been influenced by certain people. And, you know, it's all over the place. So, you know, in university or in philosophy books, you can read about the idealism of being an artist. But when you get involved in this business, it has the same issues as many other businesses in the world. It's not an ideal setup of glory and poetry and philosophy. It's full of these external forces that you have to see and that you deal with all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I also experienced, with regards to the dynamics, you know, quite an excitable engagement with the various pavilions. And just to give some feedback on the responses we got, I mean, we've got so much interest from many multiple countries, the strangest places all over the world, as to, you know, this incredible work coming from South Africa. And it really brought up the question for me about the transformation of photography in South Africa. Phumulani doesn't associate himself as being a photographer, but he does use elements of photographic media, digital practice, and so on. And I think, you know, I wanted to ask about the artist's thoughts on the presentation of photography and that seemingly space of transformation, which I felt like by showing this work, have created a space for dialogue as to how the practice is expanding, which spaces exist to show and reflect this kind of work. So do you guys have any thoughts on that expanded view of photography? And we saw many digital spaces. Actually, some people commented to us that Phumulani's work was some of the surprisingly few augmented reality works that were exhibited at the Biennale, which for me was quite a good comment, as it shows to the progression or the progressive nature of art coming from South Africa. So I just wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Perhaps with Lebohang or Phumulani going first. maybe Phumulani.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. Yeah, but in part I have this. I feel like there is a point necessarily like within photography, but of course you can disagree. Like, but it's my opinion anyway. So so the photographic regime is quite a stifled medium in one part. But I think my interest has been particularly in relations to, because there is like something that I kind of insist that we don't necessarily have to create new images. There is like so much that we can kind of ponder around and reflect on that has been kind of left missing or left in a pause, in a state of like, it's kind of frozen, so that's what I think about photography. It's a very frozen medium. It's kind of very sterile in parts, and somehow it blends to those ideas of not quite being interesting, or it's just what it is, but yeah, this is just my opinion. But I think to insist on the idea of photography is more like to insist on the archive that somehow resonates with Black people, and Black people in particular within the context of South Africa, as a starting point. So we kind of have to, I mean, the medium itself is a lens-based medium, so it's not quite isolated with any other lens-based practices like filmmaking or anything. So we have to somehow, well, there is of course that sense of direction that has somehow changed in relation to how maybe most of the photographers have kind of really responded to the lens-based media as an instrument or as an apparatus to kind of think through. But I think there's so much less reflection around the media itself and what it means, more about what it can do. So I think I'm quite interested in the shift in relations to both. And I've seen a little bit of more like kind of montage kind of style, because there is also a more kind of ways of not somehow responding to the photographic media in relation to think about like computer generated images that are somehow looking very sharp, as if they're like processed by through analog or digital, as if they're kind of done within a digital camera or an analog camera. So and as well there is more like things like filters, so that we somehow like entering. So we're kind of entering a very complicated stage of the photographic medium. Is not longer what it is, in relation. That's why I was like saying it's not necessarily about what it does, but how it's kind of also used, So I think somehow for me those are quite more interesting ideas rather than just I mean kind of say that.
That's great. No, thanks, Phumulani. Thanks for your honesty. I don't know if Lebo or Roger briefly want to add to that, because there are 2 questions in the chat about logistics. Do either of you want to add anything to kind of that transformation element? Because it's not dealing with us being photographers. It's dealing with artists working in the photographic medium in its various forms. Like you were saying, Phumulani, there's photography is what it is, but the way that it's applied is very different. So I don't know if any of the other artists have a response to or thoughts on that.
I mean, I think coming from South Africa, we can't deny the sort of impact of photography as a tool, like as a sort of anti-apartheid tool as well. I think we also come from a very specific place in which photography was used as a really powerful tool. I mean, it's, it has its history of, it's very sort of violent history, as it relates to ethnographic imagery, but it also has the flip side, being a tool that, that was used also for, to fight against oppressive systems like apartheid. And I mean, I do think that even with, you know, with the history of like the very documentary style of photography, that there's also photographers from the sort of older generation that have always had more sort of poetic ways of using photography. And I don't agree with Phumulani in that in that photography is static. And I think if anything, I think that our pavilion speaks to that. It speaks to the fact that photography or like lens-based medium, like sort of still imagery is not static, you know, because I think that all three of us use the camera, we use lenses, or you know, but also I think in terms of what we do and the sort of processes behind the production of our works or the images is definitely not static. And I think that that's really what the pavilion is speaking to. It's speaking to this idea of like, you know, photography, it being related sort of more archival imagery and this idea of truth and documentary, but also the other side where it actually to a large degree is about the sort of fantastical and the imaginary world that can be created through the image, or, you know, using sort of lens-based mediums. So yeah.
Thanks, Lebo. I don't know if Roger wants to add anything to that.
Well, look, the main event in photography has been the digital cameras. So the digital camera allows you to do a lot of things that you more easily than you were able to do before. So photography has shifted as the technology has improved. So I think this is the main line to sort of follow, because so much of what we saw in the pavilions there had something indirectly or directly, well, more indirectly as well as directly to do with technological developments. And I guess over the next coming years, you'll continually find these developments taking place. But I remember when digital photography first came out, I guess towards the end of the 90s, and all of a sudden there were these people who were making these very large photographs. And that was the thing in the art world. You know, photography all of a sudden became now finally associated as an art form because you could make a big image. And that was okay. And that theme lasted for I don't know how many years, but eventually people started to scratch their heads, I guess, I hope they did, and said to themselves, well, bigger is not necessarily an important aspect of a work of art. And so we have to still go back to this same issue if you're talking about art, you know, and photography. So I think both of the people involved here are sort of mentioning the same thing. In the ultimate end, it's the product itself, and what is the product saying? What is revealing? Is it innovative? Is it profound? Is it going to last? Is it cultural? Is it this or is it that? And I think in the end of the day, maybe that's the more important question to ask. And, you know, when a person looks at a photograph, unfortunately, they have a mindset of what a photograph is about and how it has to reveal so-called reality. And I think that's perhaps the main hurdle that a lot of people who want to work photography have to get over. Is the viewer's bias towards looking at a photograph. Their bias is that what they're looking at is something that occurred in the real, so-called real world, that it was happened in an instant, and it's something that the photographer took advantage of by being there. And, you know, and I think photographers have to fight that issue up to this day, There are boundaries where photography, I hate to say it, but there are boundaries where photography doesn't work as well as other medias.
Thanks, Roger. I know we're running out of time, so I just quickly want to address the questions in the chat. One that is apparently for Lebo and myself from Pebo, just to elaborate on our thoughts about an artist and the larger infrastructure or machinery that's needed to produce a pavilion of this scale. So it's quite a loaded question, and I don't think we have enough time to go into it. But for the most part, you know, time is your best friend in kind of the production of something so large, because when you are an artist, I think that, has a very thoughtful body of work that's very strong, that's ready to go or not ready to go. All of these things need time to produce a body of work that's strong, or even placing artists together that complete a narrative, in which, in our case, this is what happened. Like, we had bodies of work that we were translating within a certain narrative. But I mean, our biggest, you need a team of people who know what's happening. And it is very difficult. Just to the second question with regards to logistical issues, you really need experience in working abroad, shipping things abroad, who you can work with. And this is one of the things why a conversation like this is quite important to us, is to start the kind of transmission, I suppose, of information as to what it takes to put a pavilion up or put an international exhibition up, because it isn't easy. And I don't think it was easy for any of the artists or any of the team members. If it was, I suppose it wouldn't be that worthwhile. But Lebo, I don't know if you want to add anything in particular to that. Pebo, it's quite a question that needs a bit of time to answer. But also, with regards to the logistical issues, we did have some issues with our crates, which is too traumatic to go into in detail. But, especially we don't talk about it, but there are these things. And I think with the proper planning and time and so on, you can problem solve, because it is a very high stress situation, and you need to be able to deal with that. And then administrative hurdles, we worked with great shippers who did everything for us, handlers, and a team in Italy. It's very helpful to have a very experienced team. That what they do is they build pavilions. They do this for the Architectural Biennale and for the Arts Biennale. They know how everything works. The language issue is real. The time issue on their side is real, because they discuss everything. That it's Italians, they discuss how to put a nail in for half an hour, and then they put the nail in. So it takes an exceptional amount of time, again, to put the exhibition together. And I think, when you're at that level where you're showing the work for the artist is essentially done, with the exception of, one difficulty that we had is everything was done in the digital space. We didn't have capacity to go there physically and see the exhibition like you would normally do, get a sense of the space, how many areas are going to, what square meterage will be allocated to each artist. So there's there's a huge number of logistical things that are relevant to this. Doing an international project like this, it's taking an exhibition and multiplying it by 1 million. And there you have a international pavilion. So I don't know if that answers it, Lebo, if anyone else wants to add to that. I think we don't reflect on our trauma. But, at the end of the day, it is nothing that's worthwhile is going to be easy. And, to be a part of the South African pavilion was a huge privilege, and I think we'll do it all again, even if it happened exactly the same. We didn't have that much trouble, but it was difficult. I don't know if there are any other questions, or if anyone wants to add to that.
I think all we have to do is, first of all, we second what you say. We agree with nearly everything you say. And thank you for your hard work, because you did a great job in making sure everything happened and putting it together in many ways. So a lot of the success of what we did came from your efforts.
That's very sweet. Thanks, Roger.
Amé, can you say what was so traumatic? Did some of your crates go astray?
Yes, okay, I can maybe give you some insight. So first of all, there were multiple problems with the crates. We got the wrong crates from some of our suppliers. We had to remake the crates, and then we eventually got them off to the shipper. And then there was an issue of whether it was a permanent or temporary export. We sent the works as a temporary export because they will return. There's certain costs involved. You pay VAT out and in, export charges out and then VAT in Italy to keep the works there, but that means they have to go somewhere. So you have to do it as a temporary export. But we had included posters and artist books that were to be donated to the book pavilion that then were separate to this. So this delayed our paperwork. So our shipment went off late due to those reasons. And then because of the war, there's actually a lot of issues with regards to shipping at the moment. There are delays with wars. You can imagine the amount of shipments coming in for the international art, the Biennale at once. Everyone's things are arriving late. We were late, not because of our fault. We only knew we were doing this in January, so we kind of had to get it going. But, so there are delays of that. Shipping normally would take 2 weeks. If you're lucky, ours took a little bit longer. And then it got delayed in customs. And then it didn't get transported to the next thing. And then it eventually arrived with us at the pavilion. And then the customs officer hadn't sent the paperwork with. So the crates had to go back to the customs office. This was on I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday, hey, Roger? And the pavilion.
It was Tuesday at about 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
And you got to remember, we took out nearly everything out of all the boxes. So it was a miracle that it even arrived on the Tuesday. And we took out nearly everything. And then somebody came downstairs and said, oh, it's going to have to go back again. And for people who haven't been to Venice, it's not as easy as just putting the boxes in a car. It has to go it has to be transported to a boat, from land to a boat, and then off again, and then probably off again. So it was a nightmare scenario, actually, that had to be repacked and sent back again because one form hadn't been filled out. So if you want to, I was talking about artwork a little bit during this conversation, but I'll tell you one thing I won't forget is the day that person walked downstairs and said, it has to go back now. Because I've been waiting in there 4 days doing nothing. 4 days of waiting for the shipment to arrive, and then finally it arrives. Phew! It finally arrived. It's upstairs now, and then it has to go back again. I tell you.
And also, the exhibition needed to be done on the Friday, and we only got our works on the Thursday. Wednesday afternoon. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if Lebo and Phumulani know the extent of the waiting period, because we didn't really share that. We didn't want to share that, the goal. Well, Roger was there, so I couldn't keep it from him. But with the other artists, I mean, to be honest, your role. Yeah, totally. The role, I mean, your role as, say, the organizer and the curator is to make it seem as seamless as possible. The exhibition needs to be ready. We discussed everything that needed to happen. So it wasn't really necessary for them to understand all the difficulties. And then on top of that, one of our crates got damaged, which is unfortunately happens every once in a while. But as I said, we work with experienced international shippers, and you have insurance, and it's not ideal, but it wasn't too bad. It wasn't perfect. But at that point, we needed to accept a lot of things, because you just can't, there's nothing you can do. You have to do the best you can with what you've got. And I think we did that. So very happy with how it ended. Or how it's still going, I guess.
Amy, Lebo, Phumulani, Roger, I think we've come up to closing time. That's a good point to end on. I think there's much more discussion possible, but this has been a really, really interesting series of glimpses from all of you into your practice, the experience of being part of this pavilion at this amazingly high-profile event. And thank you all for making the time, and we hope the conversations can continue in different ways. And particularly congratulations to Amé for having put this all together with some of the difficulties that you've just given us a glimpse of. So very well done. And thanks a lot to all of you. And I think it's a great show, and so good that you were taking this message in the curation of the show and your work into the light to this major international gathering. So congratulations, and thank you all very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Goodbye all.
Goodbye.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
And I'll share the recording with you, and you can pass it
Perfect.
on to anyone else who requires it.
Okay,
And
brilliant.
for everyone who is here in the audience, thanks so much for your questions. And I'll be posting this and notifying all of you through the school channels if you want to access the recording. Great. Thanks, and have a good rest of the day till the load shedding.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.